Good evening. I'm Greer, President of Seahorse Victoria. With me tonight is Don George. Welcome, Don.
Thank you, Greer. It's wonderful to be here with you.
People may have just noticed from your accent you're not from here. So, a little bit about yourself.
Again, my name is Don. I moved here to Melbourne in January of 2023. Um, I used to live in Washington, D.C. for about 30 years, and I got an opportunity with my company to relocate. And I've always wanted to see this part of the world. And so I took a chance. I decided to put in for this job, and I got relocated here, back in January. I love it here. It's been wonderful living here in Australia.
Yeah.
Before, moving to DC, I was born in Detroit and kind of grew up in the Midwest.
Yeah.
So that's where this rather thick accent comes from.
Yeah, so, let's go back to those early days. So you were born in Detroit, as you said.
Yep.
What sort of background did you come from?
I grew up in a family that was very Balkan, so we're Serbs, and so when you grow up in a very Balkan, life, not lifestyle, but a very family oriented like that, it becomes difficult to kind of always be, who you want it to be. They had very expected behavior, kind of growing up. And it really became challenging when I was about maybe my teenage years, where I grew up and I could feel that I was not different, but I was having feelings that.
Before we sort of get on to
No.
that next part there,
Yep.
you say you're coming from that Serbian background, but
Yep.
with an American flavour. Would you call it a narrow family sort of orientation?
Very much so. It was very, you can't be Serbian without being Orthodox. And when you grow up in that, my grandparents emigrated from Serbia to the United States and to Canada. And, we grew up with the idea that we're still immigrants and we're the children or grandchildren of immigrants. So when you bring that mindset with you from the old country to your new country, they want to be able to still have you be part of that, nucleus of that family. And those kind of dynamics that go on into the family, like there were certain expectations that were brought on us.
One of the flavours of the conversation is about inclusion. So
Yep.
you've migrated there and you're born in the US. So did
Yep.
you sort of feel as though that you were being included in broader society or only included in the narrower Serbian enclave, as it may be termed?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, we felt like we were, in our neighborhood, we were similar but different. And we would go to church every week where we would be surrounded by everybody else who were just like us. So it was challenging because, we grew up in a house where Serbs, we go by the Eastern Orthodox calendar. We still go by the Julian calendar, not the Gregorian calendar. So Christmas is on January the 7th, and Easter is always a different time. So, celebrating holidays or, feeling like, with the other kids, we were similar but different. I thought it was interesting because in elementary school, I don't know if you had this here in Australia, but in elementary school, kids would be taken out of school to go to catechism during their elementary school time. And they got to get to go and leave school early. And I was super jealous at the time because I was thinking, where are they going? It's got to be fun.
Similar experiences. I grew up in a Catholic family, so
Yep.
and went to Catholic school. So there were periods set aside, so you didn't have to be taken out of school. You stayed in the same classroom, and sort of 11 o'clock to midday sort of thing was religious instruction, and you'd have to sort of learn the catechism by heart.
Yep. So maybe I wasn't really missing out on anything.
No.
It seemed like it was like a secret club that I wanted to belong to.
Yeah.
But
I suppose though, if it was in a more of a state or public school, that those things are set aside for people from different religious backgrounds. So in that period of sort of really settling in, I suppose, from your parents' point of view, and you're sort of feeling as though, well, this is everyday life because that's what you're growing up with. you get into secondary school. How are you feeling about yourself then?
When I got into secondary school, I could tell that I was different. Um, Much like we've talked about before, while I'm watching TV or I'm, listening to music, I would hear, Andy Gibb, and I had feelings for Andy Gibb that probably weren't normal feelings for Andy Gibb. And that's when I started to really feel, that sense of difference and really feeling like, who am I? And is it right to feel this way? Because again, growing up in my rather restrictive, organized religion, it was, a really big sin to feel that way. And from an inclusion point of view, I could tell that even when I would go to church, I could feel that I was welcome, but also not welcome at the same time because I would be viewed as somebody that was, a sinner.
And that's not something that was necessarily overtly stated either, is it?
No.
Yeah, so it's just that general feeling or vibe, as it were, to say that that's definitely on the outer.
Exactly. Exactly.
Were you actively involved in your religion, like
Oh,
being
yeah.
an altar boy or something like that?
I was. I still am. And so when I was an altar boy, we would go to church every Sunday. My dad would direct the choir. My dad was usually president of our church body. My mom taught Sunday school. So, we were, totally involved in church. And so, from an early age, I really struggled with that idea of identifying with something, but then being, I don't want to say repulsed by it, but coming up with how do I reconcile it? And when you're 12, 13 years old and you're trying to reconcile that at a very early age, it's really hard to try to reconcile that. And like, how do you do
how
that?
did that sort of your interaction with your fellow students and you being involved in school sports and things?
It wasn't really that bad of a deal because for us, I went to college prep school. So I didn't go to public school. So in high school, my mom and my dad put us into this college prep program, private school. And in private school, sports there, I mean, it's not the most organized sport in the world. So everybody can do a good job at it. So sports and everything else, I would watch guys in the locker room and I would, those feelings would come back. And so I would struggle with that.
Do you think the other students that your classmates sort of suspected something about you?
No. I mean, at that point, it was in the early 80s, and I don't think any of us really had an idea about those kind of things. So, my parents would drive me to school every day. I never really hung out with people from high school. I would see them during the day, and then, I'd say goodbye to them and then come home. So I didn't really have that kind of camaraderie with my high school friends. So it was really, that kind of, solitary time when you're trying to reconcile who you are, find out who you are, who is that authentic person and how can I be that authentic person?
Progress from secondary school, basically what would you call college,
Yep.
Imagine. So how did that go?
I loved college. College was so much fun. I went to school outside of Detroit. I drew a 4-hour circle from where my parents lived in Detroit. So I knew that they couldn't come up and back in one day because they would do that with my older brother. They would wake up in the morning, drive out to go see him, and expect my brother to be there. And so I knew if I went to school somewhere, 4 to 5 hours out, they'd have to at least call first. And so, I was like, at least I'm going to have a little bit of heads up that they're coming. College was great. I had a lot of friends in college. I was in a fraternity and, I felt really, included at that point. High school really was kind of a struggle, but when I got to university was a much better experience for me.
So what did you study at uni?
So at uni, I studied, I got a combination of psychology, and I got a degree in computer science. I remember my dad told me, he goes, Donnie, I'm paying for college. And for every one of your classes you're taking one of my classes. And I told my dad, I'm like, I didn't realize you were going to college too. And, he was like, uh, I'm seeing how computers are taking over my insurance business. He was a State Farm agent. And he noticed this computer coming into the workforce, revolutionizing how they were doing their work, because they would have heaps of file cabinets and files everywhere, all of that being reduced now to computers. He goes, you need to get in on this. And, I graduated university, and I've been in IT for over 35 years.
So he had one really positive effect on you.
He did.
Pushed you in the right direction. So while you were at uni, what was, were you acting on how you felt?
No. In fact, I think I regressed, just because at that point was really the beginning of the AIDS crisis in the United States. And a lot of the people that would identify as being those out gay men were not someone who I felt looked or acted like me. And so I couldn't identify with them. And because I didn't have that kind of identification for a role model or someone who looked or acted like me, and you put on top of it, the AIDS crisis that started to really come out during that time, it became really problematic. And I just put myself deeper into the closet at that point. And I was like, as long as I don't act on this, I'll be fine. And so, I was rather conflicted for a really long time.
So you move on and get married. So how long after uni did that happen?
So, got married probably in my late 20s. So probably about maybe 8 or 9 years after university. And I basically got married the first time knowing how I felt. But again, kind of growing up in a family where we had expectations. And, our expectations from my parents was you would settle down, you would get married, you would have, a couple of kids and do the American dream. And so I got married the first time knowing I had those feelings still there, but I kind of felt if I put it in a box.
So there's that sort of family and type pressure to do, as you say, the right thing.
Yep. There was a lot of that. It was brought to us, that we needed to do the right thing. And so, I got married the first time to my wife at the time. We had 2 great kids. I still love my kids. We still talk. They're wonderful. They're back in America. But, and my son made me a grandfather recently. So it's interesting to see how that was really the one positive that came out of that first marriage.
In that gap between finishing uni and getting married, what was your life like leading into that period?
It was pretty standard. I mean, I'd go to work, I'd try to date, but still keeping everything that I felt in that box, still being closeted, still feeling like I don't know what to do with those feelings. Those were some of the things that I struggled with a lot. And so trying to identify as a gay man, I just really had a long time coming to it for that idea of self-acceptance.
One of the things that I know for myself, it's been in my life as long as I can remember, but like you sort of push aside certain feelings and think, I don't want to deal with it. I'm going to ignore it. It'll grip yourself and it'll go away, and it doesn't. But sort of likewise, I got married and kids and grandkids and the like, and sort of that's still now part of your life. But we go back, touch on that inclusion aspect of your inner feeling is always running around with this mask on, as it were, being the dutiful husband, being the dutiful father, and the dutiful son to your parents. So how did that sort of manifest through that married period?
It was exhausting because you try to be all things to all people. And it does get to be a really um, exhausting experience because you feel like you can't be your authentic self. And I still felt like I was included in the family. I felt like, my parents would visit us for the kids' birthdays. We would all get together. So I didn't really feel I was being shunned or excluded. Uh, but I had to put on a brave front, put on a mask, and really look at it from the perspective of I can do this. I can deal with how I'm feeling, putting it into a box inside, and then try to come up with a way of going forward and being a responsible husband, son, and father.
That reticence, as it were, did that impact it at all on your working in life and environment?
I've always done well at work. So we've never felt shunned at work. I've never felt like I've, been blocked by anything along those lines. I came out at 45. Once I got divorced, then it became more of a challenge.
Yeah.
So what I liked about it, though, was the idea that finally I kind of felt comfortable in my own skin.
Now that you touched on coming out, what was the lead up to you finally deciding I've got to be open about myself?
Trying to live, a life where even though I was a dutiful husband and a dutiful father, I would still, this was at the beginning of the internet. And so what do we use the internet for? There was a lot of that. And so for me, that's where I would find my solace. I would, be up looking at porn and, feeling like I'm going to find my sense of identity and get that, part of me identified.
Before you actually outed yourself or were outed,
Yep.
what impact was on the relationship between you and your wife at that time?
We were going through a rough patch, just because for us, having kids and knowing how I felt, and it just kept building. And we became more and more distant. It was a toll on our marriage after a while. And finally, it just reached a critical point where, while I thought earlier in my life I could keep everything in that box, and if I ignore it and don't do anything, it's going to take care of itself. And it didn't. It was just building and building and building. And finally, I just couldn't control it anymore. And I decided that I needed to do something about that.
You've done that, and I imagine then that it has the changeover period, as it were, has a serious impact on the way, the immediate relationship with your children as well, and your parents and siblings. And
It was. When I outed myself at 45, and it was very problematic with especially my parents. My mom was very much in denial. She was like, Donnie, you're not gay. I'm like, kind of think I am. And she's like, you just overthink everything. And, as long as you don't act on it, you'll be fine. And I'm like, well, that ship sailed. So, it had an impact with my parents, especially. My kids, they were okay with that at the beginning. My daughter, she was in elementary school, or what we call in America elementary school. So in primary school, maybe.
primary school, yeah.
And she was great about it. She thought having a gay dad was great. My son, on the other hand, he was moving into secondary school, like he was in the 8th to 9th grade as you start moving into what we call high school. He and I had a break for 2 to 3 years where he would come on holidays, but that would be about it. He finally turned around when I got remarried, when he was a senior in high school, getting ready to go to university. That's when, I think he finally came to terms with it as well.
You mentioned about getting remarried, but in the interview, what were you doing once you added yourself to say, well, where do I find relationship?
That was tough. at 45, I didn't start dating, for, 17, 18 years. So here am I re-examining how do you date, and you're dating men.
Yeah.
So dating men for the first time was a totally new experience. And I kind of made it up as I went along, where I found, ways to meet guys. My best friend at the time, he would take me to, in DC, country western bars. I would go line dancing to meet people. I joined the gay bowling league, so we're 10-pin bowling. And it was a great way to meet people. And so I started to build a small network from that.
Yeah, and we've been touching about inclusion. So you're starting to feel much more included now in that you're open about yourself.
I was. So finally, I felt like I was more in control of my life. And I didn't feel like I'm being pulled by either expectations of my mother, expectations of my first wife. And so I kind of felt like I was finally in control of my life. I mean, going through a rather ugly divorce, you start somewhere. But every day that you move forward, every day that you make a little more progress, one step forward is still forward progress.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I really did start to feel at that point, I felt comfortable in my own skin. I felt I found my own voice. And I finally felt like I was included, and I felt like I'm in control of my life.
Now, you did mention about challenges in the workplace once you outed yourself. What sort of challenges?
In the workforce, especially when, you're the one that's going through these, times like that, it did become problematic a time or two, where people didn't know how to talk to you. And they were like, oh, how do we say things now? Do we have to not use certain words with you? And, saying things like, oh, would you do that? Because that's so gay. And all of a sudden now they would look around going, oh, Don's here. Check to see if Don's here behind us.
Yeah.
So it became not problematic, but at least it became something that, people had a higher degree of sensitivity towards me.
You talked about getting married now. So when did you meet your partner?
We met in February of 2011. So I wanted to meet men. And so I put an ad out on Match. That was the way that back then, you would find somebody. So I put a Match profile out there on Match.com. And, I would date before I met Paul through something like Match. And that's how I built my network. Then I met him. And really, after that very first date, I was like, he's the one. I remember calling my friends, my two friends that night after our first date, and they were both like, you say this every time. I'm like, no, but I'm serious. I'm really serious this time. So I met Paul in February of 2021, and, we've been together ever since. We got married in 2015. So yeah, we've been together for a while.
Then the really big change comes because you get offered the job in Australia.
I did. And it was a big move for us. My husband used to be part of our American diplomatic corps with our State Department. So the idea of being separated, and when he would live overseas and I would go back and forth, we've been used to that kind of challenge. And what was nice about that was we would feel included wherever we lived in the world. So coming to Australia, I remember my friends were like, Don, have you even been to Australia? I'm like, no. And they're like, how do you know you're going to like it? I'm like, because it's Australia. And it's been wonderful. I've not felt this included in a society in quite some time.
That's lovely to hear that, because I suppose when you live inside a society, you sort of tend to see some of the worst aspects as well as the good aspects. What aspects of you finding that makes you feel included?
What I like most about being in Australia, I tend to feel that most Australians have this egalitarian spirit where they all feel that they're in it together. Back in America, sometimes we have that stereotype of people pull themselves by their bootstraps and they're a self-made man. And really, they're not self-made men. I mean, they've made their fortune based on working with others or on the backs of others. Here, I kind of feel like you have a camaraderie, where everybody kind of, feels a greater sense of greater good. And we've started to really, again, be more individualistic in the United States. Well, here, I find it to be more of a team sport than an individual sport.
Yeah, that's an interesting phraseology because I think you've really cottoned on to being in Australian sport through now supporting Richmond.
I do. I bear for Richmond. Go Tigers. So it is one of those things where going to things like AFL, going to things like rugby, rugby, is totally different than what we have in the United States. I played ice hockey in college or in uni. And so for me, it's neat to kind of see what like American sports are prioritized versus here in Australia. So, yeah. I really try to fit in, so I want to feel included, and I feel that I have been.
I feel that it's important for people to understand that, you can be included in so many different ways. You touched upon your early religious experiences and that. So what do you do now?
I found a Anglican church I go to in Richmond. So I go to St. Stephen's over in Richmond. And I like being Anglican. When I went through my divorce and I knew I couldn't go back to the Orthodox Church, I became an Episcopalian, which is kind of like the American version of Anglicans. And so being an Episcopalian, I kind of felt like I could be included there, where they didn't care that I was gay. They were like, do you believe in the Nicene Creed? Do you believe in the Book of Common Prayer? Totally fine. Yeah. You like men? Totally fine. And I was included there in my old church where I could be part of the church board. I was our church president. And then having that feeling of inclusion in something like my spiritual home, finding something similar here, I needed to find something similar. So I became an Anglican and started going to church there. And I'm really passionate about that in making sure we feel included, to the point where I've joined our local synod where, we are trying to influence policy for inclusion, because I did not move halfway around the world just to have my church go backwards. And it's important because we look at the greater community we have, and we want to feel that our community is included. And so we do a nice group, a few things for growing food for our local food bank in Richmond. We do work with the people over in other parts of Richmond. So we really do try to take what we feel we're called to do and take it out into the community. So I do feel that I'm included there as well, that they've really embraced me. And I felt nothing but feeling included ever since I've moved to Australia. I'm just really happy.
The story that you tell is, I think there's many people, whether in the trans community or, virtually any other community, have a lot of those challenges right through your life. And that coming out feeling, yes, you're in control of your life, you're happy with what's happened. There are always going to be challenges, but you give the sense of positive, I can deal with those challenges. And I think that's a really important story to tell. And it's been wonderful to have you as my guest tonight.
Thank you. It's always wonderful spending time and having a conversation with you. So thank you for having me.
I'm Greer McGeary. My guest has been Don George. Thank you for watching Bent TV.